Let's talk about analyzing fiber content on original garments. Hi everyone, my name is Caitlin. I'm a living historian who educates other living historians by teaching old-fashioned sewing skills and copying original garments. And about once a month or so, we get together and do a whole 45-minute to an hour-long research video just on one particular topic. We kind of hone in on something just to study it a little bit more. Mostly dressmaking related, but I was asked last month in regarding to a short that I put out of one of my original garments of how do I determine the fiber content of an original gown. So I thought that would be an excellent topic for today's video. Now, I am not a professional. I'm just a hobby researcher over here just doing my own thing. I am not even a historian because I do not meet the qualifications to call myself such. In fact, I think 99% of people on YouTube or the internet in general who call themselves a historian or a fashion historian are no such thing. They're history enthusiasts, which is sort of the category I'm in, although I would really call myself a researcher because I'm not just enthusiastic. I kind of let this take over my life sometimes. A historian is someone who has an advanced degree in history or museum studies and either has published work that is peer-reviewed, that's the important part, or works professionally in a museum or historic site setting. That would be like a curator or a director or a museum manager, something of that nature. Calling oneself a historian when you merely enjoy history is the same as someone who looks up medicinal herbs and medicines, calling themselves a doctor with no schooling or experience. The title has not been earned. That is why I do not call myself a historian. My degree is in elementary education. I have not been published in the history field with peer review. And I do not work professionally in a museum, although I do volunteer or docent at very historic sites and museums across the state of Texas. Being a volunteer or a docent does not equal you being a historian. That all makes me a history enthusiast, and there's nothing wrong with that. Now, I do a lot more research, and I in general tend to envelop more professional skills. Like, I model my research as such after actual historians. So I do believe I would call myself not necessarily a history enthusiast, but more of a historical researcher. My friend Jennifer calls me her favorite mid-19th century material culturalist, which I think is also right, but also that's a mouthful, and I wouldn't introduce myself as that because that's, again, a little bit of a mouthful. All that to say, I am just a teacher. I am not a historian. I am not an expert. I do call myself a living historian, because that is something quite different than just a historian. I actually quite dislike the term living historian because of the connotations that you are a historian. And I don't believe that everyone who calls themselves a living historian, it confuses the general public when you say living historian because it makes them think historian. So I do not like that term. I also do not like the term historical interpreter because we are not necessarily interpreting unless there is an actual interpreter there to interpret what's going on in the 19th century and what's going on with the 21st century, to the 21st century visitors. That would be a historical interpreter. But I don't think the people in clothing doing the things would be considered historical interpreters. Maybe if you're in third person, I could see it, but not in first person. If I were to choose out of all the terms we have, I think reenactor is probably the best term, but it's still not right. And reenactor has connotations of you not doing it right, just dressing up and camping with a theme, as my friend Annette says. So I don't particularly use that term either. The best term that we have for what I do is living historian, but again, I do not like that term because it confuses people. It makes people think that we're historians, like actual historians, where we're not. Living historian is something a little bit different. So I'm not a historian, I'm not an expert in fiber analysis, but I do own a couple dozen original Victorian garments. I have a back room with all sorts of historical fabrics, and I have a microscope. And this channel is about education, so I want to share what I know with you. So let's get started. So we're going to start with just some modern fabrics to kind of get a feel of what the fibers each look like. And when we're talking about figuring out fiber content from sewing fabrics, and if you are ever confronted with the fact you want to know what a fabric is made up of, I would 100% do a bleach or a burn test. Those are far more accurate than the microscope because the microscope is a little bit more nuanced with human interpretation than a bleach or a burn test, which still has some level of interpretation by humans that are flawed. However, is a little bit more accurate and reliable. And if you don't know how to do a bleach or a burn test, there are YouTube videos showing you how, and you can just search for it. We're going to look at some modern sewing fabrics so we can get an idea of what we're looking for and the characteristics of each fiber. But this video is really for figuring out vintage and antique garment fabrics, because with antique and vintage fabrics and garments, we can't necessarily just snip off a few inches and do a bleach or a burn test, or in reality, we shouldn't do such a thing. Again, I am not a historian, but I am married to an actual historian, and I have worked in museums. So I do know that cutting up antique garments is a no-no, and is generally frowned upon in most professional circles. On some frayed garments, I do know some collectors who have been able to take a thread out, just a little bit of a thread, and do a burn test, but it requires quite an expert on the burn test to be able to glean any information from such a tiny sample. And I still don't like to do that with originals, so I use the microscope. It is not as reliable as the burn test, but it is far safer than the burn test. And I'll link my microscope in the description if you are interested. It's not an affiliate link. I won't make any money off it. It's literally just the microscope that I use. I know it works. I know how it works. I can show you how it works, so that's why I'm going to link it below. There is a newer version of the one I own. So the one I own is actually, it was like 40 bucks when I first bought it. I think it's in the 20s right now because there's a newer model out. So you get it really cheap and you get the one I get, but there's also know that there is a more, I don't know, I think you can get it even closer with the newer model, and I think that one's like 40, 50 bucks right now. So just keep that in mind. I love this little microscope. I had to download a program onto my computer to get it to work, but it works great, and I have it saved to my computer so I can just use it anytime. I can take screenshots, I can take a video of each particular garment. Like, it's a really nice setup for not very much money. And so now that we understand the tools that we're going to use, let's go into the sewing room and look at some fabrics under the microscope. Now, because I mostly look at early and mid and late, well, 19th century fabrics, I suppose, I really only have to learn cotton, linen, wool, and silk fibers. So I'm going to pull about 10 samples of each type of fiber, and we're going to look at what we can glean from that and maybe what are some characteristics of each of the fibers. We're going to look at some commonality between them. And now that we have a good idea on— Alright, so let's see here. Going to get started. So my microphone comes in this lovely little case. It has the stand, which I don't usually use. It has directions, and it has the microscope. So it's really cute, handheld, very easy. It has lights in here, which if you're looking at dark fabrics is definitely needed, otherwise you wouldn't be able to see anything. You can adjust if it's blurry, anything like that, depending on how far away you are from the fabric. I like to get it pretty close, so it's pretty much set where I like to set it. And of course, cute little carrying case. So my program is on my computer. This probably isn't the best way to show you, but it's right here. It's Exploview. And look, there's you in the camera. So yeah, I can plug this. It's just a USB drive, and then light goes on automatically. And sometimes if I plug it in before I open the program, it will automatically connect to this now. But if it's already connected to that, then all I gotta do is go to settings. It's integrated webcam. I'm gonna go to PC camera, which is this. Apply. And there we are. There's my skin. Just like that. Alright. I'm gonna press record so you can see this. And we're gonna start with cotton. So we're gonna start with this cotton actually. It's from my berry dress. And we can see, well, there's a cat hair. That's what my cat hair looks like. You can see the fun things on here. Pull that out. Okay. And the fibers. So fibers are all going to look different depending on the weave and, of course, the fiber they actually are. So this is a cotton. And it's a quilting cotton. So the fibers are going to be fairly close together. There's not going to be a lot of space in between them. So there's the individual fibers, which are like the hairs, and then there is the thread, which is a lot of different fibers that are twisted together. So that's what we're going to talk about mostly, are going to be the threads and the fibers themselves. So with cotton, this is a printed cotton, so it's different on one side than it is on the other. So the fabric was printed, the color and design was printed, and it seeps through a little bit on the back, but it isn't the same. Whereas a woven design, it would be the same. But when we're looking at fibers that are cotton, particularly if they are the quilting cotton variety, you're going to see the threads very close together. You're not going to see a ton of twist into the fibers. Like, they're fairly straight. Let me see if I can get darker one, might help you be able to see. So we're looking, there is definitely twist in the threads. Like, the fibers are twisted into there, but they're not like extremely twisted. And some of them are more twisted than others. And you also see these little flyaways. I call them flyaways. They're like little hairs that come out. They're just parts that didn't get twisted into the thread. And you see that on cotton. You won't see that hardly at all with silk. You'll see it with cotton, linen, and wool, but they do look different in cotton than they do in wool or linen. So I find that cotton ones are not as numerous typically as a wool or a linen would be. And they also look very much hair-like. They're not stiff. They tend to be fairly straight. They're not wiry. They're not twisted. They're not usually twisted. They're not usually curled. That's the word I was looking for. They tend to be a little bit straighter and not as numerous. And I find the best way to look at fibers individually is to find a spot where it's ripped and look at the fibers themselves. Here, let me move that out of the way. There we go. So you can see the individual fibers there. Next one we're going to look at is another quilting cotton. It's another printed design, so not as much on the back as at the front. So kind of the same thing. Fibers close together. This one is a lot more wiry. The hairs are more frequent. You'll see that with a cotton that's been washed frequently. You tend to get a little bit more of that. But still, the fibers are fairly close together. There's not a lot of twist into them. We'll look at one more quilting cotton, and then I think we have something different for the rest of them. So this is the green. And remember, these are all modern fabrics. Same thing. Get some different colors in there. You can see how close they are together. This one also has a lot of just spindly bits. The fibers themselves that are coming out. But again, not a lot of twist. But notice how the fibers themselves are fairly uniform. We saw that in the other two as well. All of the threads themselves are the same width across. There's a little bit of a difference. Like you can see some that are a little bit larger than others. But they're all, for the most part, very uniform. We'll look at something a little bit different. This is going to be a gauze, a cotton gauze. And there it is. Lots of little spindly bits. But again, not a lot of twist in the fibers. This one just happens to have very thin fibers that are really far apart. That's what makes a gauze. But again, the fibers are still fairly uniform, and there's some a little bit bigger than others. But mostly they are very uniform. Oh, there's a discolored thread. Is that all the way up? The discolored thread? I do see it. You need to really look close. But that's not something that we'd really notice at all, except under a microscope. That's fun. Alright, this is a cotton twill. There's some plain weave, but most of it's a twill. So this is what a twill looks like. Let me get you the different colors so it's easier to see. There we go. This is very wiry. Very wiry. This one has a lot of loose fibers. That's what a twill weave looks like. And then we have the plain weave. Alright, next one. This is a cotton voile, so it's a very fine fabric. And it's been printed. But look, all the fibers are mostly, the fibers are basically the same all the way across. There's a little bit more twist in these, but not a ton. Space in between them. And of course they're very small fibers, because again, this is a very light semi-sheer fabric. And you can see some differences, like there's some that are thinner and some that are thicker, but overall they're very even. This is a woven design, so it's the same on front and the back. So the yarn was dyed and then it was woven into this pattern. This is like a grayish blue and then a yellow. This is a, we would call it a homespun, but it's not a homespun, it's a rustic cotton. You see there's a lot of twist into these fibers. There's a good bit of twist, but a lot of ones that have escaped are the hair bits. And there's some difference in the size of the threads themselves, but not a lot of difference. They're just spaced further apart. That's why these particular fabrics tend to shrink a whole lot, so buy extra yardage. Alright, this is a fun one to look at under the microscope. So this is more like a actual period homespun. This is from Family Heirloom Weavers. It looks like a maroon and like a blue, right? It's kind of dull, but let's look at these fibers. Bright, bright red and green. You wouldn't think that there was that green in there, along with some gray. It's a great example of how something that looks very dull on the outside is actually comprised of some very colorful threads. Alright, so the threads, this is actually a 2-ply. I don't know, I'll point it out on the screen for you. But there are 2 threads twisted together to form the yarn that we wove with. That's why this is a thicker one. The ones we've seen before have all been single ply. This is a 2-ply on both the warp and the weft, actually. Alright, so that's the warp and the weft. So what's going up and down, that gray, that's what was put on the loom. And then the red and green was the weft. Weft is, you go to left to right. Weft rhymes with left. But some very nice bright colors. Lots of wiry spindly bits. Lots of little hairs poking out. Alright, 2 more. So this is a chambray. This is a cotton chambray. It's lighter. Nice summer weight. You can see the ends here. Nice cobalt blue. This is another single ply. Threads again are mostly the same width, but not entirely. Lots of little hairs coming out that are mostly fairly straight. They look like little hairs. I have a hard time describing them. Hopefully y'all will come up with something as you see them. Something that goes, oh, okay, this is what's the same as in all of them. There are some fibers that are different widths. But for the most part, they're very similar. That's just what a chambray is. Alright, last one. Something a little bit different. This is what a velvet looks like. This is a cotton velveteen. So I'll show you what both sides look like. This is what a pile of a velvet would look like, or a velveteen. They're literally just little, the fibers have just been cut. And on the underside, you see the weave. It's a single ply. It's just a different weave. It looks like it's, let's see if I can turn it the right way. There we go. So at least on the warp, it's 2 over, 2 under, 2 over, 2 under. That's the fuzziness. And what we call the pile, actually. Alright, so that's it for cotton. Let's go ahead and look at some linen. We're going to start with some white or light linens. Now you kind of saw that with the cotton. What I like to do with light fabrics, I like to put something darker underneath if I have a white surface and a white fabric. That way I can see the fibers. They don't blend in with what's going on underneath. And you'll see why in a minute. So there it is with the darker underground. There it is without the darker underground. And a dog hair. You see a lot more of the fibers themselves when there's a contrast to the background. Alright, so this is our first linen. So a lot more wiry than the cotton. So like the little hair sticking out, I noticed that there's somewhat more of them. They tend to me look a little bit more like wires. They're not as soft looking as the cotton. They tend to be a little bit more, I don't know, wiry looking. Also with linen, I noticed there's almost no twist to the threads. There's very little twist. And there's a significant difference in each of the threads. So there are some that are a lot thinner than others. That's what gives linen its texture. And that's fairly normal for linen. The finer linen you see, the less noticeable it is, but there is still differences. Quite a few, like there's some really thick ones right there. Where'd it go? There it is, really thick one. Some thin ones. But even there you see some differences, even between the tan threads. Linen also tends to be shinier than cotton. You can just look, there's a little bit of a sheen to it. I find cotton and linen the hardest to tell apart. The others, I find it fairly easy. But if you can get the differences down between cotton and linen, you're doing really well. Alright, so this is just a plain white linen. Not a lot of twist. Different sizes in the fibers. Shiny. A lot of hair sticking up. And they look fairly, again, somewhat translucent. More translucent than the cotton ones. But they look a little like wires. They're not really, they're fairly straight. They're not super curly. But there's a lot of them. Let's look at the ends. There they are. This is another white linen. This is just a handkerchief linen. So it's like sheer. So I'm going to show you that, yes, the fibers are thinner. But there is still a difference between them. So they're shiny, not a lot of twist. They're translucent. The fibers themselves are somewhat translucent. Again, there's some threads thicker than others. Lots of little hair sticking up. This one just has more space between them because it's a lighter weight. And the threads themselves are a little bit lighter. All right, this is from Burnley and Trowbridge. It is a brown on brown check, essentially. So here we go. There's a space between the fibers. You can see that there's that space. Still, fibers that are some twist into them, not a ton, but some twist. Different sizes. It's harder to tell the translucentness when it's not white, but you do see to the ends here. There you go. We do see that they're shiny compared to the cotton. And there's 3 different colors. So there's the tan, the like chocolate brown, mouse brown, and then there's that chestnut brown. Right, this is a navy. This is actually a pillowcase. And this is where it becomes really useful to have the light on there, because you can actually see the fibers now. This one's a lot, here, maybe it's because of this. It's a 2-layer. There you go. Okay, there's my hand underneath. Yeah, 2-layer. It looks very squished together. You can see the spaces a little bit better when I put my fingers underneath. That's why it's always best to look at fibers with a single layer, not 2. It's still different sizes. This one's actually very, compared to linen, like most linens, they're very uniform in size. But they're shiny. Shinier than the cotton. But there is some difference. Like there's a really thick one right there. It's kind of blurry. There you go. Lots of little hair sticking up. They tend to stick straight up on linen, whereas in the cotton they kind of just laid wherever they came out, in whatever direction they came out. They look softer. These tend to stick straight out. Here's a blue. Lots of different size of fibers. And are those 2 different colors? Is there a different color in the warp than the weft? Is that what I'm seeing, y'all? There's like a cobalt blue going down, up and down. And there's a softer blue going left. Is that? Find an edge, find an edge. That is totally 2 different colors of blue. I would have never noticed that. Yeah, it is 2 different colors. Huh. That's fun. The things you learn under a microscope. It's a very thin linen. You can see all the space. And the fibers are thinner, but there's still a good bit of differentiation. Some very thick fibers, some thin fibers. Shiny, you know, typical linen. And then we have a green. Right off the bat, lots of fibers that are different sizes. Thinner, thicker. Not a lot of twist. Shiny. Lots of hairs that seem a little bit more like wires. They're stiffer. I hope I'm describing these in a way that you can actually understand what I'm saying. I think the video will help you understand what I'm trying to say, but hopefully my words aren't totally off, that they're not making sense. Let's get some more linen. Nice brick red linen. Most of these linens are from fabricstore.com. This is their thicker quality of linen. So I think fabricstore.com does 3. They do the rustic, the all-purpose, and then the handkerchief weight, I think. I think that's it. And this is, I think they're rustic. Lots of differences in between the sizes. You can just see, and even between the spaces, there's like 2, and then there's a space, 2, and then a space, 2, then a space. Although it's a 1 over 1 under weave, like a regular plain weave, there's spaces in between every 2 fibers. That gives the illusion that it's, I guess, more rustic, I suppose. I wonder if that's how all their rustic ones go, or if it just happens to be this batch. It's not a problem. It's just interesting to note. Here's a little wire spindly bit. See how, yeah, they're it's harder to see, but they are slightly translucent. You can see how there's a different color between the single ones than when they're all together, giving you that color. They're shiny, and they just look like little wires. And then some patterns. It's hard to find pattern linen. This is I would call it an apron check. That would be like the period term for it. This is from Burnley and Trowbridge. I don't remember where all my fabrics were from, but I remember where some of them are from. This is like an olive green, or not an olive green, a moss green, and then white. And these are a lot more uniform. There's space between them. They are fairly translucent, especially in the white ones. You can really see that. There is a good bit of difference between some of the threads, but they are a little bit more uniform because this is a nicer quality linen. But you still find that variation more often in linen than you do in cotton. You'll see some variation in cotton, but you'll see it way more often in linen. It's a different sheen than the cotton. And obviously, it's a little bit shiny because I have the light shining on it. But it is just, it's different. Maybe some of y'all will have better words than what I have. And our last linen. This is what looks on the basis to be a blue, green, and white linen plaid. We'll see there's actually quite a bit of color in here. So there's the white, very uniform, but still with some differences. There's like a purplish blue, And that green, of course, there's actually 2 shades of green. Yeah, right down. So the left is a slightly lighter shade than the right. So there's 2 shades of green. There's the white. There's a like grayish, purplish blue. There's a teal. And then there's a cobalt. Just look how shiny that is. This is a very nice quality linen, actually. Look how uniform everything is. Particularly for linen. I mean, there is the differences in linen. There's not a lot of twist to linen, so you can see that. The wires that are coming out. Like, it definitely is a linen. It's just a very uniform linen. Now we're going to start with protein fibers. So cotton and linen are cellulose or plant-based fibers. Wool and silk are protein fibers, meaning they come from animals. So, we're going to look at some wool. Alright, let's start with... I just pulled from my scrap bin, so they're not big pieces. This is a, what you with silk would call it shot. So one side is very light gray or white, and the other side is like black. So it looks gray. Use this for an 1870s dress. Okay. Shiny like the linen, but it has more twist than the linen. Very uniform. Not a lot of spindles out of this one, not a lot of the hairs. I find wool in particular tends to have hairs that are a little bit more twisted or curly, but that isn't a rule. It's somewhat translucent. Really, that depends on the breed of sheep. So this is like 2 over, 2 under, 2 over, 2 under. That's interesting. That's why the dark comes out more than the light. Yeah, let's look at the bright red next. This one is more what I would think of like a period wool. Very spindly. Like very, very much so. Good bit of twist in the fibers. Like if you ask me what a wool looked like under the microscope, this is more indicative of what I would consider wool. And the other one is a wool I have at a burn test. And you do get very fine wools like that. But this is usually what you'll see under the microscope with the wool. Alright, this one is like a brocade almost. It has a pattern in the weave. I think this is the underside though. It's a little bit more of a loose, there's a lot of twist, but it's very loose twist, if that makes sense. The fibers are wrapping around more often than you did with the cotton or the linen, but it's a very loose weave. And this is, of course, just a different weave. I find wool fibers in particular to be bigger in size than like cotton or linen. And wool just, to me, looks like hair. If you were to get up close to a hair fiber, that's what I think wool looks like the most. This is a very fine celery green. It's actually, I think it has yellow on one end. Yes, it has some yellow or gold fibers in. Look at that beautiful weave. I'm not entirely sure that gold stuff is wool. It could be. It's kind of hard to tell because it's very much covered. This one doesn't have a lot of twist in it at all. Shiny, but the fibers are very uniform in size. It's very nice light wool. Alright, pink. This I think is a twill. Yeah. Curly spindly bits, that's more typical of a wool. Twist to the fiber. I think wool fibers curl a little bit more than linen or cotton. It's another good thin wool. It's a nice 1 over 1 under. Yeah, this is a good wool to look at. Not a ton of twist, but even fibers of even sizes. Probably would be better if I had something underneath it so you can really see. There you go. See the difference? Lots of little spindlies coming off that are curly, like they're curling down. Not like super curly, but just like wavy, I suppose. I guess since we have this one here, this is more of a uniform wool, like what guys would use. So you'll see it's very spindly, lots of curl, hard to see the weave. It's almost more like a flannel. This is what a scratchy wool would feel like. So most people, if they're allergic to wool, if they think they're allergic to wool, most of the time it's not the wool. Most of the time it's the type of wool. This is very irritating to sensitive skin. This would give me a rash. This stuff would not, because it's so fine and so thin. So not all wools are created equal. I've put people in who said they were allergic to wool in period style wool and they didn't react. It just depends. They're used to like this type of wool. And yeah, that is very irritating, particularly to people with sensitive skin. Whereas things like this are not. More like a herringbone weave. Little spindly bits. Again, it just looks like hair. Not a ton of twist. Very uniform in size. And then our last wool. This is a twill. Lots of fun colors. This one, the fibers almost look like linen. You can tell by feeling it that it's not linen. but not a lot of twist. There's actually 2 ply, I think. I think that's a 2 ply yarn, especially in that blue. I think maybe the purple's a single. Well, maybe the purple's double. It's just not very well twisted, but I feel like I've seen two in the blue at least. Alright, there's our wool. Alright, let's look at some silk. It's a big old pile of silk scraps. Recording. There we go, have it. Alright, we're going to start with this one. This is a shot silk. You can kind of see the colors change. And we'll be able to see why. There's like a red and there's like a brown. Let's get up closer so you can see. Yeah, red and brown. So silk is the easiest fiber to tell out of all of them if it's silk. Very shiny, very uniform. Very uniform. Very small fiber threads. Very shiny. Fairly straight looking, like almost no twist. Like no flyaways or very few flyaways. Very few of the hairs. Like they are very well controlled. Alright, and let's look at this lavender silk. This one I believe is also a shot silk. Yes, gray and purple. That's how it is on the loom for you. Again, very shiny, very controlled, very uniform. This is a good period style silk, very lightweight, very little difference in the fibers. That's my largest piece. Alright, this is not a period silk, but I wanted to show you. This one has what we would call slubs, which are the thicker threads like we saw in linen. Those are considered slubs. This would be considered a very poor quality silk. You see some threads sticking out. You see some that are different in size, like there's a larger one in the middle. This is what you're not looking for when you're looking at a period silk. Or looking for a period silk. Notice how one set of the fibers is much thicker than the other set. You're not going to see that on a lot of originals, occasionally, but not really. It doesn't have the body that the other silk had. And you can look at it and see that there are runs, there are some thicker parts, some threads that are thicker. So this is not what we want when we look for period silk, but I did want to show you what it was like under the microscope. This is a tissue taffeta. A lot of period silks are actually tissue taffetas. Is this also a shot silk? I had no idea actually. That is gray and blue. There you go. Very uniform. You see there's space between these fibers, whereas the actual taffeta is not. That's one of the reasons it makes it a tissue taffeta. It is semi-sheer. It's very light. A lot of the silks I handle are more of a tissue taffeta in weight. They don't have the spaces in between them. Like structurally, they are, most original silks are more like a taffeta. Weight-wise and the thickness of the fibers, they are more like a tissue taffeta. Alright, it's a good one. Alright, this is another one that has some slubs. This is actually my very first silk I ever bought. For the most part, it would be considered a good silk. You can see that, but you see there's a little bit, like there's a run right there. Where'd it go? I lost it. Let's see if I can find another one. There it is. And you will see that even on period silks. Occasionally you'll see a run like that. But it isn't indicative of a really good quality silk. But overall it's still very uniform with very few flyaways. I still wish I had this dress. I sold this dress and I regret it every day because I loved this dress. I still have part of one bodice. But I really wish that I didn't sell it. This has little dots embroidered on them. See these little dots? Again, very uniform, not a lot of flyaways, very shiny, not a lot of twist, but then it just has that embroidered dots on them. Alright, this is a tiny little scrap. This is almost the same thing. It has little embroidered dots on it. It's also a shot silk, and it has a little mini stripe. Very uniform, not a lot of twist. Fibers are the same size. Okay, this is a silk gauze. This is very fine and thin. Look at that, how spindly that is. This was for a veil. I think I just used the excess for the veil. There's just extra fabric. That one has a lot of twist to the fiber. Most of the time you're not going to find fabric like this on period though. But I did want to show it. Alright, this one Has a couple different weaves in it. So there is a plain weave. There it is. Very uniform, shiny, all of that. There's this weave. Get it up and down for you. And there's also some ribbing to where it skips some threads and creates little ribs or little ridges, I suppose. So there's ridges that way and there's more this way. But again, very nicely controlled, uniform. This is a really good quality silk. This is what you're going to see is a lot of originals. And the last one, this one has a few different weaves as well. There's a satin in here, and there's also a plain weave. All right, here's our plain weave. Yes, there we are. Very uniform controlled. Here's some of the satin part. Here's more of the satin part over here. So it has stripes that are plain weave and then stripes that are more of a satin. So there's that. Again, very controlled, not a lot of flyaways. Silk is the easiest to tell the difference. Alright, now that we've looked at the four main fibers, I have some blends I want to show you that fabrics that I bought that I know are blends. So we'll just look at those and see if we can tell where the blends, what parts are what fiber. Alright, we're going to start with this. This is a top. I cut down a dress to make a top. And this should be a cotton linen blend. Now, blends are difficult. Oh yeah, there's definitely some fibers that are thicker than others. That gives it that texture that you typically see with linen. It's very controlled texture though. I'm seeing, there is a 1 over 1 under, but I'm seeing 2 groups of thread, then another 2 groups of thread. The thing with blends though is you never know whether they are, like the twist itself, like each individual thread could be blended, or it could be the warp is linen and the weft is cotton. It could be a mixture of both. You could have a solid linen on the warp, but you could do a blended thread of linen and cotton on the weft. So it's very hard to tell with blends because you never quite know what you're looking at. This is the same thing, same shirt, it's just different color. I mean, I bought the same dress, so. Spindly bits. The spindly bits look more like cotton to me, which I believe this is more of a cotton blend than a linen. But I see, let's look at the edges. It reads more as a cotton to me, especially where it's cut. The fibers are a little bit more thicker and more, they have more body than the linen ones. But I could definitely see there's some linen in there. It just looks like it's mostly cotton, which if I remember correctly, it was like only 30% linen. Alright, this is Hobby Lobby. It is a cotton linen blend. I think it's 20% linen and 90, I think it's 10% or 20% linen and the rest cotton. Okay, so I'm seeing mostly, okay, what's going up and down right now, I'm not sure that's warp or weft. That's a single ply. What's going left to right is a double ply, which is probably where the linen's coming in. I'm wondering if the double ply is the cotton and the single ones are the linen, because I see the single ones have more sheen to them than the double ply. Am I making that up? That's what it looks like to me. Again, I really despise blends. They're really hard to tell. And then I have this, and I forgot where I bought this, but this is a wool linen blend. Sorry, a silk linen blend. Okay, it looks like the fibers are blended, like entirely. There's definitely twists like there would be with linen. Yeah, I think the silk and the linen were blended together. I don't remember how much of it was what. Lots of flyaway, so there's definitely some linen. You don't see that with silk. So I definitely see where the linen is coming from. I'm looking at that black and seeing how it's different. Like some of it's more gray, some of it's more black. I'm wondering if part of that is the silk blended in. I'm betting that black itself is the silk. Because I am seeing some black and little white bits flying away. You don't see flyaways with silk. I'm not seeing that cobalt blue that's running through. I'm not seeing any flyaways with that cobalt blue. I bet that's silk. And then I have one more special treat for you. So I actually happen to own a little bit of original piña cloth. This is from the 19th century. Piña cloth is made from pineapple leaves, or the fibers of the pineapple. You can see it shredding. It is antique. It has a couple different weaves in it, but I've never seen it under the microscope. So I do want to see what piña cloth looks like under the microscope. Lots of broken fibers. It's very finely woven. There's more of a satin weave. It is shiny. I mean, it looks, if I hadn't done a tiny burn test on it and know that it's definitely not a protein fiber, to me it looks like silk. There are some flyaways. Like there's more flyaways than there are with silk, but not as much with linen or cotton. I think the only thing that's telling me that this is not a silk are those flyaways. Yeah, it's definitely a plant-based fiber. It's the most silk-like plant-based fiber we've seen. I guess that was our first bit of original fabric. I'm going to go grab some more original pieces, and then we can see what they look like. I don't know if we're going to go in any particular order. I'm just going to try to organize them by fiber. Like, we'll do all the cottons, we'll do all the linens, we'll do all the wools. I just don't know what I'm going to grab first. Let's do silk. Also, I have like no original, I have very little original linen to show you, but I do have silk, I have some cottons, and I do have wools, so we can at least look at that. I guess I have cotton linings too, we can look at that. Alright, anyway, let's go ahead. This is it's either 1850s or early 1860s silk bodice that was remade in the mid to late 1860s. It's been Frankenstein together. Alright, so let's see. This is the first fabric. I'm pretty sure you can see that that's silk. Very uniform fibers. Almost no flyaways. Very, very uniform. And this is the second one. So I don't know if you noticed. I don't know if you can quite tell if that is a slightly different fabric. It's similar, but it's not quite exact. This is actually the peplum that she added on later. But yeah, definitely silk. Let's look at some lining. This is polished cotton. It's gonna be shiny. There's some fibers that are to the different width. I don't think that's linen. That looks like a cotton to me. Very twisted. Even though some fibers are a different size, just sits like a cotton. This looks to be a cotton twill. Actually, I don't think that's a twill, is it? Is that the wrong side of a satin? I mean, it's too fuzzy to be linen. It's definitely a cotton. Even though there are some slubs. Let's see what else I got. Oh, I got some velvet buttons. It's going to be really hard to get a good focus on this. Does that help, kind of, maybe? Can't quite tell if this is silk velvet or cotton velvet in the period. This is another type of velvet. It's the trim. I'll give you a close-up of the trim real quick. There we go. Yeah, that's what the trim looks like. It's beautiful. It feels like silk. If you've never felt silk velvet from the period, it feels nothing like modern rayon or polyester velvet. It is so soft. I wish I could let you feel things through the camera. I really do. But yeah, I would think that's silk. But it's way softer than any cotton velvet I felt, even from the period. But yeah, that is fairly... It looks more like a cotton, doesn't it? And the fibers are pretty small. They do look like silk fibers. Maybe it's just the way they wove it together that makes it a little bit more chaotic. That's fun. Alright, this is a shot silk. This is a late 1860s dinner bodice. Short sleeves, but high neck. This looks to be like a ribbed silk to me. Yeah, and it's I knew that was a shot. But it has a texture to it, so it's a ribbed silk. I'm going to see some buttonholes up close. What buttonholes look like? They're so perfect. This gown has the most perfect buttonholes. You know, I always think that I'm doing pretty well with buttonholes, then I look at originals and realize that I've never seen anyone, even people who teach how to do buttonholes, I've never seen them get close to this. This is immaculate. I know some people, I'm sure there's somebody out there who can do them this well, but like all the tutorials I've seen about how to do buttonholes, none of them look like the originals. The originals are just too perfect. Let's see, this is a satin. I'm not sure if I'm gonna, yeah, there it is. So that is a satin trim. And then we have these little pearls. They're definitely synthetic pearls. They're not real pearls. And they had synthetic pearls back then as well. I remember seeing some sort of article about how to make imitation pearls. And I like put in, oh, I need to go back and read that because I have this dress. And did I ever go back and read it? No. Alright, this looks like to be another polished cotton. Yeah, that's definitely cotton. Some different size fibers. But a lot more controlled than a linen would be. You see this variation in things like lining cottons. Like where some fibers are much bigger. And we're probably not going to look at as many originals as we did actual fabrics. Alright, let's look at our beautiful 1850s to very early 1860s silk dress. I did the short of not too long ago. So let's see, up here we have polished cotton lining. Well, I can show you piping up close. We have the trim, and of course we have the silk. Alright, silk. Look at that nicely controlled silk. There used to be a hook there. Yep. There's a thread hook up here. There it is. There's a thread hook. So many facts. There are so many colors in this. Like, it looks brown. And yeah, there is brown. Brown, black, white. We've seen that so far. Brown, black, white. There's also bright red. Green is somewhere over here. Where'd that green go? There it is. There's that green. So all sorts of beautiful colors in here. And of course there's that cobalt blue to the trim. And there's brown in the trim too. So there's the trim. Definitely silk. There's them up there. The fringe itself doesn't feel like silk to me. It wouldn't surprise me if there was some cotton in there. I'd say it's definitely a little fuzzier than silk. Maybe it's a cotton silk blend. But this part, the gray part, or the brown part, is definitely silk. Yeah. And it's 2 different colors of brown. Can you see that? Several different colors. There's a black. There's several different shades of brown. Let me show you what I'm looking at. So, this is the first trim we're looking at. This is the cobalt blue. There's the brown part. And this was the second one. Oh yeah, we have the embroidery on glaze, don't we? Let me show you how fine this fabric is. Take a look at that. That is a very nice cotton. And it looks like there's a lot of space between it, but when you see it, it's like it's sheer, but you don't see the space between the fibers. Alright, let's look at some piping cord. There's a little bit of piping cord peeking out right here. There we go. That is definitely a cotton. Look how fuzzy. I find polished cotton to be not as fuzzy as the other types of cotton that we've seen. Alright, we're going to do one more dress. There's the pelerine that goes with it. We're just going to look at the pelerine. This is probably the least controlled. This is not a very good quality silk. There's no twist in the fibers at all. Doesn't look like. They're not as well organized as you usually see with silk. That would explain why it's shredding so much and why it's so thin and fine, and yeah, it's not a great quality silk. Here's a trim. Wouldn't surprise me. This feels like silk velvet. Yeah. And then we have some polished cotton for the lining. Let's do some wool. Actually, it's named Wool and Miscellaneous because I kind of want to know if I have cotton lace or if I have silk lace with that. So we'll play a fun guess game. So this is a wool shawl from the 1860s. It was kind of been moth-eaten. That's not from me. I bought it like that. I got the whole thing for $25 because it was moth-eaten. Now when you wear it, you actually can't see the fact that it's moth-eaten. It's just, you know, when it's sitting like this, you can really tell. But when it came to me, it got to live in the freezer for like 3 months to get rid of all those nasty critters so that the critters don't go into any of my other stuff. We have the house up for sale, but we've already discussed whenever we do get the house sold, I'm getting a small deep freezer just for original garments. So that when I get, because I've been getting some new things lately and I don't have space in my normal freezer. So it's one of those, I need some space. Red's always so hard to see, but you can see lots of little flyaways. They're a little twisty, turny, not necessarily curly, but they'd curl more than like a cotton or a linen would. Lots of twists in that fiber. Let's see some, there's a hole. I like looking at holes. Holes are fun. I don't like the original garments have holes, but I like seeing the holes. There's a hole. And there goes my AC. We're going to have to live through it. I'm sorry. Alright, and then we have the embroidery. That is done with a wool yarn. Look at that. Curls and bends more than a cotton or linen usually does. But yeah, that definitely looks like a wool yarn to me, which actually doesn't surprise me at all. A lot of embroidery back then was done in wool. And then there's this, let's see, I'll show you. There's the border, and then there's, I guess, the hem almost. So I'll show you the border. Ooh, those are some really controlled fibers. Is there some silk blended in with that? I'm thinking the small fibers are silk. I think the small fibers are silk. I think the thicker ones are definitely wool because I see flyaways. I wonder. Let me know what y'all think. I think the smaller tan colored ones are silk. And then this is just, look at the different colors of wool. I just want you to just notice the beautiful colors. Notice the variety of colors you can get in the mid-19th century. Look at that green. I mean, look at the green. No, it is not arsenic. Every time I show anything green in this channel, I get at least 2 or 3 comments that go, "That was dyed with arsenic." No, it wasn't. There are a million ways to get green, and only 2 or 3 of them involve arsenic. And look at the black. And there's so many different shades of green. There's that green, and there's that green, and there's that green. And the blue, like look at that aqua blue. Oh, and then I like that shade of blue too. Black, definitely a wool. Let's look at the fringe a little bit. It's always fun to look at fringe. I like fringed edges. Isn't that pretty though? Oh, there's an orange too. I didn't see the orange. Look at the pretty colors. Who says they didn't have bright colors back then? Uneducated people, that too. Alright, this is another one of my shawls. This is either 1850s or 1860s. I'm not great at dating shawls, alright? This one is plainer. It has some sun damage from when it was displayed. And then it has this lovely little motif that's cut from the same fabric of this. And then we have some hand embroidery here as well. And I have some pieces coming apart. I've done a little bit of mending on some areas of this. It's just where the thread is disintegrating. That's just normal wear and tear. There are some threads that don't last as long as the fabrics themselves. So I've been mending that when that happens. Oh, that beautiful wool. This is definitely a wool that would not irritate your skin. It's not fuzzy. There's a little bit of fuzz, but it's not bad at all. And here's the red portion. It's really hard to get. Here we go. Okay, red, and there's another color underneath. Like that's a gold, you think? Yeah, looks like it. Definitely wool. Let's do the other colors. There's so many. Like this looks plain and boring because it just looks brown. But when you get in there, there's so many beautiful colors. Yeah, that is not an arsenic green. There's a particular shade of arsenic green. This is not it. And I'm not sure if they dyed wool with arsenic. I want to say it was... I know they did it with silk occasionally. I don't think they did it with cotton or with linen. I don't think it would hold up. I'm going to have to go back and look. And I am curious. I've never actually tried to do fiber analysis lace before. This ought to be fun. It's definitely not as controlled as we're used to seeing with the silk. There isn't as much twist as cotton usually. And the fibers that I use with lace are very particular. I'm going to go with that silk. I'll let y'all tell me what you think in the comments. Alright, let's go with wool. It's a nice little weave. Several different colors, or at least 2 different colors. There we go. Yeah, 2 different colors. They're translucent fibers. It actually wouldn't surprise me if this was blended with silk. I think the ones going up and down are wool. Like that looks like wool. Not sure about the ones going across. This I think is linen. Yeah, that's linen. That looks like linen. Very nice, very dense linen, which is what you want a dense fabric for lining. Lots of fuzzies. And this is a cotton that's in the facing and also at the waistline. Yes, that is definitely... Wait a second. Hang on. Is this not woven? Is this a printed fabric? That's a printed fabric. Those stripes are just printed on. They don't take up the whole fiber. Do you see that? I really thought that this was a woven design. I really thought that was woven. That is interesting. Cool. Alright, I think that's good for this one. That was fun to learn. Yeah, we did recreate this dress not too long ago. Alright, this is a dress that y'all have not seen. This is a 1850s dress. Myself and a couple of experts believe it to be wool, so I just want to show you how like thin and light. Like you would think this was a quilting cotton, except that it's actually lighter than a quilting cotton. Like period wools are amazing. I just want you to feel like this is a wool. But let's look at it and just make sure. What we were looking at earlier, there's like that's translucent fibers. That's weird for wool. Maybe there's some wool breeds that just that is like translucent. My goodness. I mean, it's definitely wool. They don't stick together like silk does, they're like a little pricklier, so they stay further apart. But look at that. Beautiful colors. There's that, where'd that blue go? There it is. Like, that is just beautiful. Look at all the colors. There's 2, 3 types of pink, a green, at least 2 blues, a dark brown, a couple shades of brown over here. I can give you a close-up of that print. If I can find somewhere to print wool, yeah, if I can find somewhere that would print wool, because I wouldn't do it as a cotton, I would print it as a wool. If I can find somewhere that will print wool, or if you know somewhere with a light, fine wool that would print wool, I would copy this pattern and I would offer it. Because it's a beautiful print. This, I believe, is linen. That's a cotton. Well, long cloth is always hard for me to tell. That's a cotton. And yeah, there's some differences in size, but the fibers themselves, that looks like a cotton. Yeah, it's not cool to the touch. So yeah, it probably is a cotton. Here's hem braid, that's wool. Was there something different in this? Yes, there's some in the sleeves. Nice little rustic cotton. Yeah, lots of different colors. Dark blue, it's probably indigo, white, bright orange, 2 shades of brown at least. It's probably someone's leftover fabric or husband sleeve or something. Because there's a cuff in this. Like, there's something that's been banded down here, and then there's a separate piece here. So it wouldn't surprise me if this is someone else's sleeve that she took off and decided to use as her lining. I think this is cotton tape. Let's find out. Well, and then the bottom, because she only lines it with that for a little bit, and then the bottom of it is the regular brown cotton. That way, if she opened her sleeves, it would look like it was lined correctly. But there really is no correct way to line sleeves. It's just she used scrap fabric. That means there's 4 different fabrics in this dress alone. That's definitely a cotton. Because there's the regular lining that she also used for the facing. There's the bottom sleeve, and then the top sleeve lining. She did the same thing over here. Yep. At least she's consistent. I mean, she did the same thing on both. I've seen somewhere where, like, one sleeve is lined with one fabric and another sleeve is lined with a totally different fabric. Alright, this is a silk trim. Yep, that's a silk trim. It's hard to get a good picture of it. I'm sure you can see that that looks like the silk we've seen. Alright, one more wool, then we're going to move to cotton. Actually, let's see, yeah. Let's look at some wool flannel. I think I showed this one off recently on short. It's just an infant petticoat. This is wool flannel. Very fuzzy. Some people would find this irritating. It's actually very soft compared to modern wool. But yeah, sometimes the fuzziness would irritate some people. Some people, yeah, would find that quite irritating. Is this silk? That is silk on the edge. So it's a silk binding, wool fabric, about the embroidery. Looks like it might be silk. What about the tapes? Wool. Alright, let's move on to some cottons. Here's an infant shirt from the mid-19th century. I actually have a set of these. I'm putting some dark blue linen underneath just in case that helps. Oh, that helps a ton. Alright, let me readjust. That could be cotton. Feels like a linen. I'm seeing the different size fibers more than... I'll let y'all put your guesses in the comments. Alright, just recently copied this shirt actually. So let's look. This is long cloth. And I'm going to bet this is cotton. That's a cotton. Comparatively, I would say the last one probably is a blend. Fibers are closer together. There's still some variation in size, but not a ton. Definitely fuzzier. And the fuzziness is, again, more relaxed. Not as structured as you typically see with linen. So yeah, I would agree that is probably a little cotton shirt. Alright, this is 1840s-ish baby gown. How fine and thin this fiber is. That is cotton. That's cotton, but look how fine that is. It's not quite as fine as the undersleeves we saw in the silk dress, but it's close. It's just not quite the quality. It's almost there. See the embroidery up close. Look at that. It's a running stitch, a couple of eyelet holes. And it's just basic white work. It's not Ayrshire work or anything. It's just basic white work. Oh yeah. I don't think I've seen this one yet. This is an 1850s teenager's dress, and it is sheer as all get out. Like, this is the fabric. Like, look how fine that is. I have actually not tried this under the microscope, so let's find out together what we think this is. I'm gonna get a single layer here and get that blue underneath. That looks like cotton to me, doesn't it? I think that looks like cotton. I wish I could get up a little closer. Maybe the newer model you can get closer. That's silk. The embroidery is silk. Now it always could be a wool silk. It could always be a wool cotton blend. I'm seeing the up and down fibers being a lot more fuzzy than the across fibers. And most of the across fibers are much thinner. Not all of them, but most of them. I think it's a cotton. I'll let you put what y'all think down below. Alright, let's look at this 1840s little baby dress. Little toddler dress. I need to send a picture of this to a friend. Alright. Where'd that blue go? Oh, there it is. Oops. There we go. That's cotton. Yeah, that's cotton. Comparatively, yeah, I would say this is a cotton. After seeing them side by side, yes. That is a cotton. Lovely little print. Nice blue. What else can I show you on this one? So funny, I actually never do this with my own collection. I bring this to museums to do museum pieces, but I never bother with my own collection. So this is actually the first time I've done this with my own stuff. Yeah, that looks to me like cotton. Is the underside. Yeah, I'd say that's cotton. I have 20th century stuff too, but I have not even tried to start learning 20th century fibers. So I think that's going to have to be a part 2 video at some point. Yeah, this is a little tiny pelerine. It has cotton, and those are really far apart. It's not quite like a gauze, but it is getting there. That's about on par with the weight of the undersleeves. Let's look at some of this white work. Cotton thread. Look at that. Look at 2-ply. Is it yeah, that's a 2-ply thread. Yeah, that's a 2-ply. Some thread work over here. There we go, there it focuses. It's also along the hem, and there's a little buttonhole stitch along the hem as well. It would help if I showed to you, yeah, with that blue underneath. There's that little buttonhole stitch, very tiny. And there's a binding on this end as well. That is almost gone. But that was fun. I got to see some of my other pieces. We'll have to do part 2. I just don't think we have the time today. This is already going to be a really long video. Now with antique garments, you can sometimes tell, or at least do a very well educated guess on what the fiber is just by the type of garment that you are looking at. If you see a white chemise, you know it's likely going to be linen or cotton because those are the most common fibers that are used in that particular garment. What I find particularly hard to do is blends. I really have a hard time with blends right now. I'm still learning my blends because the 19th century liked to blend flat fabric a little bit more than what we do today. So you'll see cotton linen blends, you'll see silk wool blends, wool silk blends, you'll see silk cotton blends, you'll see wool cotton blends. Like there's so many options for blends. And sometimes I have a hard time distinguishing the blend part. So that's something I'm learning right now, is trying to get better at identifying the blends. Now, just for reference, none of these original garments have been positively ID'd with a burn or a bleach test. So I'm going to say what I believe it is and why I think that, but I welcome any other thoughts in the comments. I certainly hope that helps somebody that may be looking at antique garments and fabrics and wanting to know exactly what they are comprised of and how to better identify them. There are some professional books out there that would be great resources if you would like to look into this further. And I will link some titles below. I have not purchased any of them because some of them are well over $100 and that's just not in my budget right now. So I'm learning with experience. Basically doing what we did today. Start with fabrics I know the fiber content of. And I wouldn't necessarily just trust the label. I would do a burn test of each modern fabric that you're looking at, simply because sometimes labels are wrong. So definitely start with that burn test. Then move on to, once you kind of know what it is, look at it under the microscope and be able to identify, okay, it burns this way. We know that things that burn this way are this. Okay, this is what this looks like under this microscope. I would start with like 100% fabrics, like 100% cotton, 100% silk, 100% wool, that sort of thing. And then move on to the blends once you get a fairly good hold on these solid fiber garments. So that's about it for today. If you've enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe to the channel, click that little bell notification so you're notified anytime I upload a new video. And as always, have a fantastic week and I'll see you back here in the next video.